it's so emotionally charged sometimes at the beginning that it's hard for them to be able to see the end. Like, how do I actually get through this? And they will get through it, but like, how do they navigate through that and actually just come out okay? That was the agent's response. It's just 1 to list. I'm like, well, no, it's 2 to sell is the rule in Minnesota. Today we have Lisa from Bowden here, and we're super excited. We're going to get into, what to look for when hiring a divorce attorney or when someone in family law, contractors and repair costs. So, what are the contractors and repair costs? How do you handle those? Getting creative. So, are there ways that you can get creative with a divorce? The biggest mistakes to avoid, and then the advantages of mediation and an arbitrator. How long have you been in the divorce field, or how long have you been an attorney?
It's hard for me even to believe this when I say it, but it's been 26 years. So I've been practicing law for 26 years, and my first experience as a lawyer involved a divorce matter. So it has been that long.
Is that how you picked it? Like, how do you pick that field?
Interestingly enough, I never went to law school even thinking about family law. I'm not even sure I completely understood what falls under the umbrella of family law. I thought I was going to go to school to be a criminal defense lawyer. Okay. And so when I was in law school, you get to take various types of classes. And one of the classes that I took my second year of law school was a family law class. And it was taught by an adjunct professor that was a practicing family law attorney. And she was such an amazing storyteller.
Okay.
We would listen to these stories and we think, okay, we're going to hear about this case, and she describes both sides, and she would never let on which side she represented, which I thought was amazing. And then we would be waiting, okay, what's the answer? What's the answer? Well, there's never really an answer.
Oh, really?
And so she would just give, here's the result. And it was more like, and I think what was so compelling about it is that often the way she told the story, you thought you had figured out which side she represented. And then at the end, she would tell you, and you're like, I didn't think that. Wow. So it kind of piqued my interest in law school. Still wasn't sure that's what I was going to do. But when I was in my second year of law school, much like most of the law students, everybody's looking for a law clerk position at some firm or somewhere. And I got one, and it was a general practice firm. They did civil law, they did family law, divorce, they did bankruptcy, criminal defense. It was really a great opportunity to get just a view and an ability to work on all sorts of areas. Okay. And so I did, and I just happened to get a lot of the work on family cases. Okay. I really liked one of the partners that I think primarily his practice was family law. And so we got along really well, and that was my experience. And so that's, I think, kind of what started to steer me toward it. Okay.
So obviously we're in real estate. So what are the biggest challenges you see when dealing with a divorce? Or dealing with any sort of family law, I guess, when it regards to real estate? Like, what's the biggest challenges regarding real estate?
I think that one of the hardest things for families that are going through the divorce is that you can have one, and sometimes both parties, be very emotionally connected to the home. Okay. And that can create problems in a couple of ways. First of all, it's always going to be a problem if both parties want the same piece of property. Yeah. And so I can tell you from experience that that issue alone sometimes has driven a case to trial, where the judge then ultimately has to decide who's going to get it.
Who gets the house.
I think one of the other issues, though, that is really challenging is that often in divorce matters, you have one party, not always, but very often, I think, one party that's already 100 steps ahead of the other party in terms of, I'm done, I want to move this forward in a business-like manner. And the other person hasn't caught up to that yet. They're still dealing with the grief of the loss of the marriage and the fear of what is it going to look like on the other side of this. Okay. And haven't, sometimes if they feel like they're the ones that got blindsided with the divorce process, and they become even more emotionally attached to the homestead. And I think that's a really common thing. And I think one of
Is it because they're trying to hold on to what's left of the relationship, or?
I think that might be true in some cases. I also think that it's something that, because the whole world's changing, and that's the thing that can remain constant, is where you live. And it could be because it's tied to, what's best for kids and stability for the children. One of the challenges for divorce lawyers in those situations is making sure that the client really can get to a point of realizing, is it just an emotional attachment? Because sometimes that is stronger, especially early on in a case, even though the attorney might be well aware of the fact that it's not financially sensible for that person to want to keep the house. For instance, if there aren't a lot of other assets, it could mean that, well, you're going to get to keep the house, but you're not going to have any of the other liquid accounts because those are going to have to go to the other party to offset the interest. Yeah. And so you have situations where it can become really difficult for the party wanting to keep the house to really financially manage it after the divorce.
Do you see that now? I mean, almost in particular because rates have gone up so fast. So I mean, they have a family home that's at 3%. And then one of them will be looking at, getting a 7% or 6.7% loan to buy out the other person.
Yeah, I think that there have been a lot of challenges with the increase in the rates. I mean, I think about it over my career. I mean, I lived through the boom times early on in my career with real estate. I lived through the, horrible housing crisis we had, mortgage crisis that we had. Right. And those really, it was, I went along in my career, and early on, getting the house was a big deal. It was, that was a really good investment, and you had a lot of people that wanted it. And then you get into the 2008, 2009s, and the house was a liability.
Right.
You had houses that were underwater, and neither party wanted it, but they didn't want to sell it and take a financial hit. Right. And so you had people actually fighting over who had to keep it.
Who had to keep it.
Yeah, right. Instead of who got to be awarded the house. So I think with what we're seeing now is a real push for people to get real creative in their divorces to try to maintain those mortgages with the lower rates, the 2 and 3% rates.
And how do you do that? So what type of things have you seen that work for people to be creative?
Well, I think one of the things that I've seen pretty frequently over the past probably 3 years is people really looking to see whether they can qualify for an assumption, if their lender even allows for that. I can tell you that I've had 2 cases recently that was a Wells Fargo mortgage lender and U.S. bank lender, and they both have assumption programs. Okay. It's different than an assumable mortgage, which I'm sure you're well aware of those. I had to educate myself on assumptions so that I could understand more clearly what they are. They have the same type of qualification process, but what a great
So do they have a different process? So I haven't done it, for a divorce. We do a lot of assumptions where a new buyer, wants to take over the old loan. Is there a case? So, I mean, usually the bank is looking at it saying, they want to make sure that whoever is, taking over the loan is a good risk. So do you have any pushback from the bank, or do they have specific programs for a divorce where, because you're obviously, if you have 2 people on the mortgage and now you're going to 1, the bank is less secure?
Right, and you can also, and that's also, it's problematic when you might have the party that's keeping the house, that wants to keep the house and wants to assume the mortgage, is also the person that's going to be receiving some kind of a support award, spousal maintenance or child support. And yes, with receipt of those monies, it may be that they clearly have enough to be able to maintain the homestead, but whether or not that that's lender,
not approved yet.
Right, the lender might not believe that that's going to carry the day, or that's going to create some problems for qualification. Now, I've worked with some mortgage brokers, and so I have some understanding of whether or not someone might qualify for that. So I'm, obviously we explore it in those cases that we think that it's a possibility. But I think that it's been really a good program because it's kind of lengthy. I think my experience has been that a lot of banks can get a refi done probably within a couple of months, sometimes even less than that. My experience with the assumption process is that it is a longer process.
Okay.
So it's something to keep in mind. It does take longer, which that's important for breaching agreements in divorce cases about how long does the person keeping the house have to get that accomplished. Because obviously you have another party that is saying, I would like to be taken off that mortgage. I don't want to be personally liable on the mortgage note any longer. So,
And what are the common mistakes that you see divorce couples make when just going through the process? What are the biggest common mistakes you see them make?
Well, I already touched upon one, and that is really not being able to separate your emotional attachment to a home and whether it's financially feasible for you to keep it. That can be hard. And I do spend a lot of time in my cases and counseling my client throughout the process. And I've had many of them switch positions from the beginning of the case. I absolutely want to keep the house. You figure out what you can do to make that happen, because that's what I want. And as the case goes along with more counsel, and often I think it's because they've gone through the grieving process during the period of time, and now they have less emotional attachment. So I think that's a challenge. I think also too, sometimes you have situations where parties are behind the scenes talking about things and reaching agreements without having advice of counsel.
Okay.
And that can make things more difficult. I'll give you an example. Parties kind of behind the scenes saying, yeah, this is what I think the house is worth. Yeah, let's just agree that that's what it's worth. And really basing it just on, kind of their thoughts, and not necessarily looking at a market analysis or a real estate appraisal. And then that being an extra challenge then when we say, wait a second, if you get, after talking with that person saying, I'm not sure that makes sense in terms of the value, it can make it more difficult because the other side then thinks that you're dealing in bad faith.
Sure.
So
what is the process for determining value? I mean, is it different levels? You can start with a market analysis from a realtor or someone they know, and then you have to move to an appraisal, or how does that work?
It really depends on how well the parties work together. I've actually had cases where parties have been able to say with confidence, this is what we believe our homestead's worth, and we're both willing to go forward on that. So you can establish value by agreement.
Okay.
So parties have a right to say this is what our piece of property's worth, and they can agree upon that. I think also sometimes because they can get them fairly quickly and for free in most cases, parties will seek out market analyses from realtors to get a sense of the ballpark of where their home is, the home value is. The courts don't rely on market analyses generally, and so if you think that there might be a chance that you might end up having the court decide an issue with respect to who's awarded the home, generally you're going to want to get a real estate appraisal expert's opinion.
Sure.
And
what happens if they disagree? We've even had, obviously, appraisals are wrong. Appraisal comes in at $700,000 and the house sells for $650,000.
Sure.
And again, the appraisal, back when they did the appraisal 6, 7, 8 months ago, that might have even been accurate, but now throughout this process, the value could have dropped.
Absolutely, and I think we see that we've seen a lot of examples of that happening. Parties also sometimes, and I can remember when I first started practicing, it was very common that both sides would get their own appraisal expert. So we would hire someone, our side would hire someone, and they would go out and appraise it, and then the other side would hire their appraiser, and they would get a value, and then we had a battle of the experts because, generally speaking, there's some subjectivity to any appraisal.
Right,
so
right.
it would be probably quite odd to get two that are exactly the same value. But the problem with it is that then that battle of the experts sometimes will drive people to court. And, it really, we've tried to alleviate that by encouraging, I think the family bar, I think most people in the family bar are really kind of on the same page that this makes sense for folks, is that we try to agree upon one neutral expert. Okay. And so that we don't have that battle of the expert. Doesn't mean that people are always happy with that value, but there are certainly you can have someone critique the appraisal, and if there are mistakes, inaccuracies, those can be managed because obviously we can all make mistakes. An appraisal expert can make a mistake in terms of square footage or whether the basement was finished or whatever in the adjustments. But for the most part, you're going to want to hire people that you trust, that you have a good experience with, and I think that's generally what we do.
Yeah, and we've seen it on the real estate side. The people will they'll agree on the price to list it, but then the price comes in a little bit lower, or you have an offer that comes in, let's just say $20,000 below list price, and one party is just they want to really move on, and the other party doesn't, but they haven't agreed on what that has to sell for. They've just agreed that they would list it for X. So then what happens when they don't agree? Hey guys, sorry for the interruption. If you like this content, please subscribe to our channel. Now back to the video.
So I can tell you what I do in my practice to avoid problems like that. If you need relief from the court, it's really slow. And I can tell you that if parties are trying to sell a property and you get an offer, you don't have the luxury of the court, 2-3 weeks for the court to make a decision. Your buyer walks.
Right.
So what I generally do to avoid that is to have a provision that the parties agree to, that we basically hire someone as an arbitrator that can make decisions during that sale process, during the listing and sale process. So if there is, for instance, a recommendation by the realtor to say, you know what, I think to get some more interest in this property, we ought to make a price drop. And you can have a situation where one says, absolutely not, I'm not selling it for one dime less than $100,000, right? Well, you could have this third party that's been engaged as a neutral that the court has said, yes, you have agreed, and now that person has the authority.
And they have the authority.
They make the decision. So you get a purchase agreement in and they're disagreeing about whether or not to accept the offer, you can go to the third party. And I will tell you that generally that third party is going to follow the realtor's recommendation.
Okay. And do you find, and I think that's, I guess, the advantage of having a good attorney, because I think some of my clients that haven't worked with you or they've worked with, they've done this themselves, those are sort of the ones that you get the most worried about. What role does a divorce attorney play in basically negotiating the real estate settlement?
Well, I don't get involved in a real estate transaction necessarily. Obviously, I'm working on the divorce piece of things, and that involves the value of property, how that relates to the rest of the assets that we're dividing. But clearly, if there are, just like I mentioned, if there are reasons why we need to have an arbitrator appointed so that we can make sure that we can get some timely decisions on matters affecting a sale of property, that's something that obviously I would be involved in helping parties do. But I think that generally it's really about guiding parties as to the process of whether or not they're going to try to keep the house, and whether that involves looking at the financing, assumptions, refinancing, or if ultimately has to be put up for sale. And I will say that, I'm willing to offer my clients, the people that I have worked with and trust, to do a really good job for them in terms of selling a homestead, helping them determine financing through mortgage broker referral. And so that's, I think, also the role that the lawyers play in that process.
Yeah. Do you get a lot of arbitrators, where you have an intermediary or some sort of an arbitrator making decisions on behalf of people?
Well, I will tell you, we do that in a couple of different aspects. We can do that with respect to parenting time issues.
Okay.
And so that's a role where we actually delegate authority, the parties delegate authority to that, what we call a parenting consultant, versus the court. And again, it's the same idea. It's they got a problem comes up, they need a quick decision, it takes weeks to get into the court. So with respect to sales of real estate, I can tell you that I would say probably 90% of the divorce decrees that I draft that involve the parties selling their real estate post-decree or after the divorce is done, I would put in a provision for that arbitrator to be there to make decisions during that sale process.
Okay. So if they have, like, we deal with, some, high net worth people that have multiple properties, how do you deal with those, or how are those different? If they have 5, 6, 7 properties, they got a few rental properties, a second home, how do those differ from your, side of things?
So in terms of, the types of property, and there's lots of examples of people that come in with a homestead, for instance, a vacation home. They can have rental townhomes. And so that is part of their, their investments. And so it's not necessarily treated differently. A lot of times I have a case right now where it's the same type of situation where they're making decisions about, does it make sense for spouse A or spouse B to get the income producing properties?
Oh, sure.
And so those are considerations that we manage in trying to figure out how to divide the property. And sometimes it makes sense for the income producing property to go to, for instance, the party that maybe would otherwise need spousal maintenance. Okay. So you want to make sure that you pad their side of the of the ledger with properties that can also then help on the support issues.
Right, not just be a liability.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, some properties we deal with that on the investment side of things, where you're buying something that, this thing, if you can afford it, this one will make a lot of money in the long run. But right now, the short term is maybe for the next 2 years, this is going to lose money.
And I think those are all considerations that have to go into developing what, position you have in terms of the division of property.
Yeah. What trends do you see right now in the divorce world? What trends do you see, for the next, say, year or two?
So definitely, as we already talked about, there's a trend for people that are getting a divorce that have a home with a low mortgage, coming up with creative ways for one of the parties to keep it. The court does not require a homestead or any property necessarily to be sold, provided, if one party wants it, provided there is a way to adjust the property settlement so that it's a fair settlement. Okay. I think the trends in terms of the homestead and real estate.
Is it just a monetary compensation? So, we had one recently where the one party was willing to take over the mortgage at 3%, but the other person resented the fact that they would be able to get a good deal. They didn't want the property, but they didn't like that person could get the cheaper rate.
Well, and
do you sometimes have that too, where it's like, well, how? So they wanted additional monies towards the fact that they were not able to get that same deal themselves.
I think that definitely that's something that could get negotiated when you have, if what you're saying is that someone could be irritated that they're going to have to now go out and get a 7 or 6 or 7%
it was like,
rate.
6.7 for their new one, but this old one they were able to keep at the 3.5.
And really that will come down to more of the expense side of things. So division of property is really going to be about valuing all of the assets. So that mortgage rate doesn't have really an effect on the value of the asset necessarily.
Okay.
It has an effect on what you're going to pay, and the fact that the other person that has to get a new mortgage at the higher rates maybe won't be able to get as much of a house as the spouse keeping the one with a low rate. So that amount of what they're going to pay for a comparable house, because that interest rate's higher, will go toward, it could affect the support piece of things. But that's separate and distinct from a division of property.
Okay. What do you look for, from a realtor and people that you're looking to, kind of refer your clients to? What are you looking for?
So when I'm wanting to provide my client with a trusted referral, I am very concerned about making sure that the person that I'm referring them has experience dealing with people going through divorce, because people are going through sometimes this. It is the biggest financial transaction for most of them that they'll ever go through in their lives. It is highly emotionally charged in a lot of cases. It is. It can be very anxiety producing, terrifying, and so people will say that. They'll say, thanks for helping me when I was at my worst.
Yeah.
And so it is one of those things where you want to make sure that you're sending your client to someone that can handle that type of atmosphere for a client.
Yeah, it is. I think I was teaching a class, at our office for new agents, and it was this came up because we had written an offer on a property that had been listed by one party, right? So the Mr. Seller had signed the listing agreement, but Mrs. didn't agree to sell. So we write the offer, and then all of a sudden it was like, well, she doesn't want to sell the property. I think, well, how did you list it? I mean, you only had one person's, agreement, and this agent was just, he thought that was fine.
Well, and that's exactly the type of thing I'm talking about, is that a realtor that has dealt in the divorce arena in terms of dealing with parties that are going through a divorce would know that you absolutely cannot list a joint property by just having one party sign it.
Yeah. Yeah, it was bad. And then the worst part was just the communication. I think, when I was teaching this class, it was all like, you have to communicate equally, right? Not necessarily simultaneously, because sometimes they don't want to be, on the same phone call or on the same text string. But you're going to have the same conversation maybe twice, maybe 3 times, so that everyone really does know what's going on and you're communicating effectively, but not, just more equally.
Yes. And I think that's really, really important. So I appreciate you saying that, because I have had situations where I've had my client feel like they're being left out of the loop, because I will ask them for updates. Okay, have you talked to your realtor? I don't know. I think that he's talked to Joe. I don't know.
Right.
And so then I'm in a position of contacting the other lawyer saying, okay, I need to have some information here, because it looks like, maybe that, there's been some unilateral communications, and we need to make sure that everybody knows what's going on with the property and the sale, and is they're making joint decisions regarding price reductions or list price or whatever.
Right.
And I generally, when I deal with, because there have been occasions where I will need to reach out to the realtor who is helping both sides. I generally like to make sure that the other attorney is also a part of those communications. So whether it's we set a joint phone call, or we just make sure everybody's on the same email.
Yeah. Yeah. So the class that I was teaching the other day, number 1, just don't take a listing with one spouse. To
Basics.
Me, it was so common sense. It's like we write the offer, and all of a sudden the seller, Mrs. Seller didn't want to sell. And that's a non-starter. And it's like, it's so hard in our industry when the people that are doing this for a living literally don't know how to deal with they don't know how to deal with a divorce, or they treat it the same as a normal. Mm-hmm. They just think it's like, 2 people that own a property, and you can just get one person to list. That was the agent's response. It's just one to list. I'm like, well, no, it's 2 to sell is the rule in Minnesota. So, yeah, no, it was crazy. Number 2 is compromise neutrality, and that is, basically making sure that you're communicating equally and not just simultaneously. Because the people don't always want to talk together. They don't always want to jump on a group phone call or a group Zoom to discuss the offer. Maybe having 2 separate conversations about the offer so you can talk about what's important to them. And, really it's always, we can usually get people to agree on getting the most amount of money, but when do we want to close? It's very different for each party.
Right. And I think that you're also going to find in situations that, and I have seen this a lot in having my clients attend various types of ADR, which is alternative dispute resolution sessions, is that one party might really have a difficult time speaking in front of their spouse, or they feel they clam up, they feel they feel powerless, and that's sometimes part of the reason why they're getting a divorce. So it's really important, I think, that you do think about those the communications, and making sure that both sides get their opportunity to voice their concerns, or that what they want.
Yeah. What else should people know? So what should realtors know, or what should people getting a divorce know, about you, and kind of what makes you different?
Well, I think that what I like to bring to my clients is a sense of, I'm going to be able to help you through this, and I know what the other side looks like, and I want them to take some comfort in that, because I see so many people come to me and they're so fearful of how is my life, what is my life going to look like when this is done?
Yeah.
And so I want to provide some of that comfort. And I feel like that's the satisfaction I get from my job. It can a lot of times feel very thankless because, like I said, people can be very emotionally charged, and it's a tough time in their life. And they're not going to be their best selves. And so I like to be able to unload some of that off their shoulders. We're here to take care of the things that you're fearful about because you don't know them. You've not gone through this before. And so I want to make sure that I can convey that to people. I also feel like because I am very practical, and I do know that a negotiated settlement for parties is the best thing for them and their families. I have to go to trial occasionally. It does happen. I like.
The negotiated,
I like,
for the layperson out there, the negotiated settlement just means we didn't have to go to court.
That's right. It means that the two people came together and reached an agreement. And it might be that it was reached after a mediation or even a couple of mediation sessions, but it means that they came together and said, this is how we want the terms of our divorce to be set. And they didn't allow a third-party judge to have to make that decision for them after a very expensive, long, drawn-out trial.
Does mediation help? I mean, do you see that working?
Mediation is, I think, probably employed in about 80% of divorce cases.
Okay.
Yes, the courts are they're very motivated to encourage people to go to mediation. And in fact, in some instances, they require you to try to resolve it on a dispute on your own before you can have the court make a decision for you. So mediation is very, very common. And I think it's a great tool. It provides an excellent forum for people to be able to come together and start that process of cooperation, because there is a level of cooperation that has to happen when you're valuing properties and determining how things are going to get divided. Just think about, how difficult it can be just to move from one house to another.
Right.
When you're in an intact family. Think about how difficult that is. Like, we've lived in this house for 20 years and we've got to go through all this junk that we've accumulated, and I don't even want to be around this person that's supposed to help, or also has to be involved in that. And so there are, I think, things that the mediation forum it can be really helpful for that.
Okay. Yeah, we find it. I mean, we're meeting with, obviously people that are already going through a divorce many times, and it like you said, it is stressful. It's stressful, and it is rewarding to be able to be involved and sort of help them navigate that process. But many times it's like when they haven't had good counsel, when they haven't had someone help guide them through it, it's so emotionally charged sometimes at the beginning that it's hard for them to be able to see the end. Like, how do I actually get through this? And they will get through it, but like, how do they navigate through that and actually just come out okay? I mean, it's not going to be the same, and obviously it's a challenging process, but like helping them navigate that and make it through.
Yes, and we will, make sure that we are helping a client, and if that means that they need to get some outside help to help with their emotional well-being, then we encourage that as well. But we want to handle the legal side of things, but we do that with, a sense of understanding and compassion that this is a tough situation that they're going through. Yeah. And so I feel like, I think I have a wonderful staff, and I feel like they are very welcoming to our clients and really give them a sense of, we're here to help you, we're here to take care of you, we're here to make sure that you are fully informed and that you understand the costs involved. I think what I know is going through the process can be, obviously very stressful emotionally, but it can also be very financially taxing. Yeah. And so we work hard to try to help people, show them, here's how we can save, this money that you and property that you and your spouse have accumulated, so you can keep the majority of it for yourselves. Right. And not spend, a huge portion of it on matters that in a year, 5 years are not going to feel that important. The two people that are most in control of how much a divorce case costs are the parties. Yeah.
So with regards to the financials, because you brought that up, One of the things that we do, which is, and this is standard for any divorce, we will basically finance all or any of the necessary repairs for them. So we just pay for them up front and then just get it out of the proceeds. And, what we find is that, like you say, people are dealing with, who's paying this and who's paying that. And they're already in a situation where maybe they've got an extra house or an extra apartment or something that they're already, in a financial spot that they're not used to. Right. And so now they got $6,000 worth of repairs that need to be done in order to get the house on the market. Well, who's paying for those repairs? So on our divorce, deals, what we've done is we just say, we'll pay for the stuff up front. And we just, we have our contractors come in, do the work. We know they're good. We know that they have good prices. And then we just get paid out of the closing. So then it's just one less thing they have to worry about.
I think that is really an exceptional service that you provide.
And when I didn't provide it, it just created so many problems because it was like, well, then who was going to pay for it? It was like just one more thing for them to have to argue about. And I'm like, you know what? How about we'll agree that we'll pay for it and then get paid back out of the closing, right? Because it's just to simplify it.
It does.
It made it so much easier.
Yeah, it does, and there is often an issue of, okay, so well, if we're going to need to do these improvements or repairs to get the house ready on the market, she's going to have to pay for it. I don't have any money.
Yes.
He's going to have to pay for it. I can't do it. So I think that's great. And I think the other thing what it also helps too is that often we have to have provisions that say, any mutually agreed upon in writing repairs or improvements can be shared or paid out of the proceeds. Because I will just tell you, I just had a situation where I had a client say, well, I'm gonna refinish the floors. And I was like, hold up.
Right.
We have to get written agreement from the other side. Otherwise, you could refinish the floors and not get reimbursed.
Right.
And that's not going to feel good because if refinishing the floors means you're going to get more for that property potentially, and you're not going to be reimbursed, but you're going to share that additional amount received, that's not going to feel very good. So I think with you fronting those costs and having the parties agree, because that's the writing component, they're agreeing when they sign with you that it will be paid from the proceeds.
Yeah.
That takes care of the requirement. And so that is, I think, a really, really nice service that you provide.
Yeah. It's it became something that it out of necessity we had to do it on one file, and then we realized it just works so much easier. And then they find it to just be it works so much better for them because it's our contractors. On one that we did recently, we were able to get in and out of there, got everything done in less than a week. And, we just make a few phone calls. And so because a lot of that, getting the house ready when maybe it's been in disrepair for a year, 2 years, 3 years, because obviously prior to them being in this circumstance, things were not going necessarily well prior to that. So sometimes the house, became an afterthought, and the things that were maybe needing to be done around the house weren't done. And with, 31 years of selling real estate, I think the contractors that we work with, we can trust. And they're some of the best in the business. They show up on time. Their bids are competitive and they get the work done.
And I think that's wonderful too, because another point too, then you don't have parties having to try to agree upon a contractor that's going to do the work, all things that will slow the process down. So with them agreeing, with the parties agreeing to delegate that to you, I think that makes the process more streamlined, and it certainly helps parties not have to be caught. Well, why does he get to have his contractor?
It's just one more. You're right.
It's just one more thing.
One more thing. And the one we just literally were working on last week, it was they had window cleaning was set up, but it was not going to be done for 2 weeks. They really wanted the house on the market, but we were at the mercy of the window cleaner, who was nearly double the price of our guy that showed up within 24 hours. And you think, well, you were going to pay that person almost $1,000, and we got it done for less than $500.
Yeah, it really is a good thing for parties.
Yeah. What final advice would you give to people who are going through a divorce, or just people who are navigating this process, kind of getting started?
Well, the number one thing would be to consult an attorney. And I am a proponent of people talking to more than one before you make a decision on who to engage. It's so important that you feel comfortable talking with that person, telling them anything that you think might have any relevance without feeling embarrassed or shy about it. It's really important that you feel that connection. And you often can't do that if you just hire the first person that you meet with. But I think definitely if you have any property, you have parenting and custody issues, it definitely makes sense for you to talk to an attorney, consult with that person, and find out what you can expect from the process. And
what questions should they ask? Because obviously most people probably aren't familiar with how to interview a divorce attorney. Like, what questions should they ask you?
Well, I will tell you this: I don't have people come in for an initial consult expecting that they need to have a list of questions for me. What I like to do for them is I like to give them an overview of the law in a nutshell and how the process works. And during that discussion, I'm asking them questions about things that are specific to their case.
Okay.
And so often I will tell you when I get done with the initial consult that if they do have any questions, I've probably answered most of them already in talking with them. And I think it's really important because I think that if you're going to get to the point where you are going to call or email and then an attorney and set that appointment and then get in the door, because it's a tough process for people. And that you need to leave there with some good information. Yeah. And instead of, like some situations where you might just go in and they sit back and wait for you to ask questions, they're not going to know what to ask.
Right.
And so
you help guide them. I mean, they know that they need help, but they don't even really know what they're supposed to ask.
That's right.
Wow. Well, I really appreciate you coming in today. I think that people, that are navigating this, like I say, I mean, you said it, they should consult with an attorney. I've said it, like they need to seek professional help so that they can avoid, having all of the mistakes that you hear about. How do they get a hold of you?
Well, I can be found on the web. So my website is bowdensear.com. My phone number is 651-288-2844. And you can call, you can go on the website. There is a form that you can fill in information and it will send an email to our office.
Awesome.
And we offer consultations on a half-hour free consultations.
Oh, perfect. All right. Well, yeah, we'll put your contact information in the notes below. So anyone you want to click on that. And thanks again for your time.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Hey guys, thanks a lot for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. If you like this video, please like and comment below.